Hey, it's Drybear. Back again with our Diablo 4 build guide. We've made over 20 builds on this channel, and we're back again coming into the Sorc build category. And today we're going to be talking about my Frigid Fracture Sorc that focuses primarily on freezing and shattering, and will use all of the ice abilities in the toolkit. I love this build a lot because when I was back as a kid playing Diablo 2, Frozen Orb was one of my favorite, most jaw-dropping abilities, and it comes back to life in this build. But first, you should come hang out with me on my live stream. I'm live every single day on twitch.tv/Drybear. If you don't come hang out with me in the community, the next time you buy Starburst, you'll get an extra Starburst in your bag, but it's gonna be yellow. All right, let's jump into the build. This is your Shatter Frigid Fracture Sorceress, or Sorcerer, as they're calling it here. I have the full build down below in the description, built on d4builds.gg. I filled out all the legendaries and the uniques, as well as the gems, the skills, skill tree all the way up to level 50 when you unlock Paragon, as well as a first draft of what the Paragon board would look like for this build. Again, without knowing the extent of all the content we're going to have access to at max level, it's hard to know how much defense we need, how much damage we can allot for, and where the build is going to go for the Paragon itself, and how we can best utilize these glyphs. But I didn't want to leave you guys high and dry as we progress through the game on launch day, that if you end up using Frigid Fracture to play your Sorc, I want to make sure that when you hit level 50 and you have Paragon, that you at least have a blueprint to get some value out of this. And this still has a lot of strong synergies in the build itself, so you'll still get, this is a decent board to run with for Paragon, but I will most likely have to update it once the game is live and we have experienced more of the content that is at the actual true endgame. Let's start like we always do with the skill build, as it does specify everything else for the build. And again, our focus here is on shattering, chilling, and freezing enemies. So we're gonna be using ice primarily and leaning a lot on those effects. So obviously our only ice spender, or our only ice builder, is going to be Frost Bolt. Very simple, you throw a bolt out, you deal damage, and you chill them, which is really nice. We like having the chill because we have scalers that scale off of that, especially in our Paragon board. We're gonna modify it so it has a chance to explode, dealing damage against, and then it has a guaranteed chance against frozen targets, and we have plenty of ways to freeze targets aside from bosses. We also wanna get mana. This is a pretty mana-hungry build, so anywhere that we can find mana generation or regen, we're gonna pick it up. So getting some mana here when you hit chilled or frozen enemies means that as you cast your Frostbolt, you're getting mana back pretty quickly. Your spender for this build is going to be Frozen Orb. There's some really cool legendaries that scale off of this. I think the ability itself is really fun. And once you get those online, it turns into a real monster of a skill. This one, you shoot an orb out that does ice around it. It deals damage, and when it expires, it explodes, dealing damage and chilling enemies. And we actually have a legendary that allows it to linger for max duration and then explode, which is really cool. When you cast a non-basic ability, you gain a 20% chance to launch a Frozen Orb at a nearby enemy. We are going to take the Frozen Orb enchantment for this because it will scale off of our Frozen Orb ability, which is really nice. Having that secondary chance to trigger a non-basic skill, which is basically, Frostball, all of these abilities down here, they will have a chance to spawn an additional Frozen Orb. And because we have the legendary that makes the Frozen Orb hang out for max duration and do more damage, even if it's a 20% chance to launch a Frozen Orb, it's really useful and increases our damage by quite a bit. We also want the extra explosion damage when cast above 50 mana, and we also want 5 mana back when hitting a frozen enemy. Every enemy that can be frozen will very easily be frozen by this build. Coming down to defense, we're going to pick up 2 defense here because we're going to skip all conjurations. There is some alternate builds that go for ice blades here. I just don't think you can invest the Paragon points or the legendaries you need to make conjuration work in this build. So we're going to focus primarily on damage to chilled and frozen targets, as well as shattering against non-boss enemies. And we can even optionally run avalanche against boss enemies as well. So we're going to skip conjuration and we're going to pick up double defense. What's cool about this is we're going to run ice armor, which is a barrier that gives you a big fat amount of your base life. And while it's active, the damage that you deal refreshes your barrier, and we can get modifiers as well that increase the duration of barriers. And you can even switch some points around for that as well. But this is a very easy way to get defense in the build. And then we modify it so that when it's active, you get mana regeneration. Remember, this is a mana-hungry build, so we need that. As well as enemies hit while you have ice armor active have a chance to become frozen. So it's another easy way to add frozen into the build. And the easiest way to get that is with Frost Nova. When you activate Frost Nova, it is a cooldown. It doesn't cost mana. which is awesome. There's only 2 skills in this build that cost mana, so you can focus on spending primarily on Frozen Orb. Frost Nova, you activate and it'll freeze all enemies around you, which is really nice. Killing enemies frozen by Frost Nova reduces its cooldown, so when you freeze and then kill, and then freeze and then kill, and with Shatter procs, this easily procs that, we get some value out of that. And then you also want to make enemies vulnerable for 4 seconds and 6 seconds to bosses. In the freezing Paragon board, we have a lot of scalers against vulnerable targets, which by itself is already a damage amp by definition. So we get even more damage off of that. And it's nice that there's a even bigger value out of that for bosses as well. We're gonna come down here, we're gonna skip the Conjuration portion of the board, and we're gonna come over here for our other mana spender, Blizzard. This one just gives us a very easy way to get chill on targets. This does cost mana, but it lingers for a long time, so you don't have to keep spamming it over and over. So we're gonna have a Blizzard on top of wherever the enemies are. You don't wanna be spamming this, but just make sure you have one rolling, and it'll continually chill enemies, which we get damage amp for chill, and it does decent damage on its own. We're also gonna make it so it does increased damage against frozen enemies. Most enemies that can be frozen will be frozen. And when you have an active Blizzard, your core skills cost 10% less mana. So another reason why Blizzard fits into this, you spend 40 mana for a single Blizzard, and if you enhance the Blizzard, you get a chance to form another Blizzard, which follows you around, which then can apply the same benefits. So you get, as long as you have one Blizzard up, you get the cost reduction on your frozen orbs. Every single frozen orb will be 10% less mana, which is great. Helps us, counteract that big mana chunk that this build comes with. And then for Icy Veil, we picked this up. If you wanted to, you could probably lower the value of Ice Armor, or maybe even just lower the points out of Frost Nova. You don't necessarily need full points here, especially against bosses, although you do still get the vulnerable from it. And with legendaries, it's possible you don't even need any points besides 1 in Frost Nova, because we have ways to reset this if we need to. You can reclaim those points and put it into Icy Veil for more barrier duration. Then you also want, when you have a barrier active, you apply more chill. It's useful. It helps against mobbing and things like that. Against bosses, there would probably be an alternate build where you may not even need this at all, but it's nice to have the extra chill in there for general gameplay. And then Snap Freeze, you have a lucky hit chance to instantly freeze targets for all Frost skills. So Blizzard's ticking damage, Frozen Orb's ticking damage, your Frost Bolts are ticking damage, all your AoE Frost is ticking damage, and those will have a chance based on lucky hit to instantly freeze any target that can be frozen. So you're gonna have tons of freezing targets. And with our key passive, you'll see in a second, we like having targets frozen in general. Going down into the ultimate tree, we are gonna pick up Deep Freeze. This serves as a very easy reset for us in a fight because we become immune for 4 seconds, essentially ice block from other Blizzard games. You activate it and you deal damage and chill enemies around. When it expires, it explodes, and that damage is scaled later on once we have good gear. Casting Deep Freeze again ends the effect early. So you can actually have scalers for this where it does damage based on how much damage you deal. It does bonus damage plus even more damage. And it's a way for us to give us self-healing as well. We actually have legendaries where, when Deep Freeze is active, you restore life and mana per second. So you spend everything, get everything rolling, go down in mana. If you get in danger, you pop Deep Freeze. You start regenerating mana and health every second while you're immune. You apply freeze to targets. You can also do it that when Deep Freeze ends, you gain life as a barrier, which helps bridge the gap into getting your ice armor up again, and does open the opportunity to run a barrier-based build if you want. And then also when it ends, your non-ultimate cooldowns are reduced by 50%. So you use all your cooldowns, pop Deep Freeze, regenerate health, regenerate mana, reset your cooldowns, start again. It's a very safe, tanky build, especially if you start building more towards barrier, which you certainly can do. Coming down to key passive, which is the final point of the skill build here, there's going to be 2 choices and depends on how you play and what you're facing against. This build in particular, for this, like the Frigid Fracture build, focuses on Shatter, which is after freeze expires on any enemy, enemies explode for 25% of the damage you deal to them while frozen. So while they're frozen, they store up damage, and then when it expires, they explode and deal damage in an area. And we also have ways to, when freeze expires, it freezes others, and then when that expires, it explodes and freezes others. And so you have this cascading effect of just turning everyone into ice blocks and exploding and causing, ice pieces to be flying all over the screen. However, the one downside with this is that bosses cannot be frozen in general. So if you do run into a situation where you're going to be doing a boss run or focusing on a boss or a major boss, you could quickly slot out Shatter and add in Avalanche. What this does is that when you have a lucky hit that your Frost skills will make your next Frozen Orb or Blizzard consume no mana and deal 40% increased damage, and it's doubled against vulnerable enemies. So if you're running against a boss that can't be frozen, this is going to be great for mobbing and very quick dungeon clears. But when you get to the boss, you could probably just quickly slot out a point, put in an Avalanche, get your increase for Frozen Orb with no mana cost. Very cool. And then, for other pieces. Or if there is a boss, if the boss has lots of adds, you probably still want to run Shatter, because that AoE damage is still going to be hitting the boss and giving you decent throughput. So those are all options there for you in the skill tree overall. There's even some decent options here, like increasing maximum mana, as it is a very mana-hungry build. But that is the skill build for this build of Frigid Fracture Sorceress. Now let's talk about the gearing. First, for the gems, you want crit damage against vulnerable enemies, because with our Frost Nova, we're going to be guaranteeing very high uptime for vulnerability. This just gives us a crit damage scaler for most of the time. Also, barrier generation is great. You want to run diamonds and armor. You can also, if you really want to, you can run just more defense here, or if you're especially for going into a barrier style build, which this one isn't super focused on that, but you can, then barrier generation becomes even more valuable. And for jewelry, I think you just want resistance. You're probably going to be able to avoid most physical damage either by becoming immune or slowing enemies and kiting them, but that isn't going to prevent you from getting hit by magical effects that go all over the screen. So resistance here is going to be really big for this build in general. Now let's talk about the uniques. These are the late game items. They're hard to get, but you will get them eventually. And I like including them in this build, in these builds in general, because it's something to look forward to. So you know that, hey, coming down the line, this build's going to get even cooler, pun intended, but also just because there's a lot of synergy with some of these uniques for some of these builds. So I think it's important to highlight them. The first one is going to be the Ice Heart Braze, the leg item, the unique leg pants that is usable here. Enemies that die while frozen have a chance to unleash a Frost Nova, which will freeze others and benefit from the effects of the Frost Nova that you have here. Which means if you have Frost Nova equipped, if an enemy dies while frozen, they will shatter and explode for the damage you dealt to them while they were frozen. They have a chance to cast Frost Nova, which will freeze nearby enemies and apply vulnerable on top of that, and your Frost Nova will reduce. So you're spreading the Frost Nova with the chance from this unique. Super cool, super fun. You're just going to have freezing explosions, causing more freezing explosions in perpetuity. Penitent Greaves are great for this build. You leave behind a trail of frost that chills enemies, and you deal more damage to chilled enemies. Not only are you applying chill with almost everything that you do in this build, but you will leave behind a trail that chills enemies as well. So at any point, enemy that can be chilled isn't chilled. If they follow behind you, they will be. And you get a nice scaler for damage against enemies that are chilled, which if they can be, they will be. You have so much chill in this, it's going to be out of control. For the Helm, we want Frost Nova gains an additional charge, but the cooldown per charge is increased. This allows you to Frost Nova multiple times. So when they become unfrozen and expires, and you have Frost Nova available, you can instantly refreeze them, which will cause more chain reactions of Frost Novas and freezes and explosions and shatters. It's possible you don't need this with enough resets for your Frost Nova. You might get things that end up unleashing Frost Nova, resetting and lowering the cooldown on Frost Nova. Even with Deep Freeze, it's possible that the cooldown reduction on Frost Nova is going to be high enough. But I would say for general gameplay, plan on having Frost Blitz. It's a nice pickup. It gives you 2 options for Frost Nova. And then, it keeps that chain rolling once you have the Shatter Key passive active. Encased Aspect, we already talked about. While Deep Freeze, which is your ultimate, is active, you restore % of your max life and mana per second. So for the 4 seconds that you have Deep Freeze up, your health and mana are just rising and rising. And remember, you're immune during this time. So there's no incoming damage that's hitting you. You're not casting anything. Your mana is not going down. So you become immune while you're letting all your freezes expire and all the explosions go off, and your health and mana is going up. Encased Aspect works great for this build. And honestly, any build that uses Deep Freeze, I would consider running Encased Aspect on it. Aspect of Biting Cold. When you freeze an enemy, there's a chance they become vulnerable for 3 seconds. I think you're not going to have perfect uptime of vulnerable just with Frost Nova and into your other casting abilities here. I don't think there's going to be enough there. So having this means that if you freeze them and the vulnerable goes off from Frost Nova, and then you freeze them from your procs as well, they become vulnerable. But just keep in mind that there may be a future when you're fully optimized that you actually don't need Biting Cold anymore because you're keeping relative uptime for vulnerable. And this is going to help a lot with bosses too, because you want vulnerable up all the time, especially if you end up swapping over to the second key passive Avalanche, which remember doubles your proc chance to get the free frozen orb if you hit a vulnerable target. So the more uptime of vulnerable you have, the better off you will be. We already talked about the two uniques here for legs and for boots. For weapon, you can consider running this with a two-hander for increased effect. Frozen Orb stays in place after reaching its maximum duration and explodes 2 additional times. So Frozen Orb will move forward, and instead of expiring instantly, it'll chill there, pulsing, 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 and then it'll explode, and then explode, and then explode. And remember, we have a chance to spawn a free Frozen Orb. So, because we enhanced the Frozen Orb, remember? You have a 20% chance to launch a Frozen Orb. So, aspect of Frozen Orbit will apply to the Frozen Orbs that you cast and the free ones that you get. So you have these orbs that are just going off all over the screen, exploding multiple times and lingering and causing like you're in the middle of a blizzard. It's crazy. For offhand, if you decide not to go with a two-hander for Frozen Orbit, if you want to get an offhand instead, while Ice Armor is active, if you pick up Frozen Wake, you leave behind exploding ice spikes that deal damage. Your ice spikes also chill. It's possible that the damage increase from getting a two-hander on this outweighs the ice spikes here. It's just hard to know exactly how much this scales late game, and also if you will end up needing the chill or not. It's possible that you won't. You have so much chill in this build already, but I wanted to kind of leave room to run this legendary as an option because it could be that the damage increase is actually quite respectable. For rings, we're going to run Aspect of Control. You'll deal damage to enemies that are immobilized, stunned, or frozen. It's possible you can swap this out again if you're focused on bosses at the time, because obviously you can't freeze bosses. But damage to frozen targets is nice because remember, we have so many effects that when we kill an enemy while they are frozen, we get more benefit, which means that if we get a nice 40% damage amp on enemies that are frozen, it overall increases our chance of killing them while they're frozen, which triggers our passive effects and keeps that whole pain train rolling. Or the other ring, Aspect of the Frozen Tundra, is a nice pickup here. While Deep Freeze is active, exploding ice spikes form in the area, dealing damage, and your ice spikes have increased explosion radius. So again, another option here, along with Frozen Wake, but while your Deep Freeze is active, this could end up being a nice increase of damage. But if it turns out that it's not, then you can swap this in for plenty of other rings that are in that slot. For the amulet slot, explosions from the Shatter key passive, which is enemies when freeze expires, they explode. Explosions from that key passive deal up to 40% increased damage if enemies die while frozen. Again, damage amp against frozen targets. If they die while frozen, it triggers a Frost Nova, which freezes other targets, which then reapplies the damage amp to those new targets. And if they die while frozen, the explosion from your key passive is even better. So all of this synergizes together to you just being this walking blizzard of death. Super cool. This is this build I'm pretty excited about in running. Let's round out the video by talking about the first draft of a Paragon board. Again, it's hard to know how to get these just perfect because there's going to be a lot of questions that I just haven't answered yet until I get a hold of the real game. But there's still plenty of synergies in this Paragon board that work well for this build in general. You start with the basic board. You're going to come up here for stats. You want mostly intelligence and willpower. Intelligence for necromancers or for sorcerers give you skill damage, and willpower gives you mana generation. Super helpful. There might be a world where you run dexterity for the crit chance, but I don't feel like you absolutely can fit that in there. And I think intelligence willpower is going to just be better overall for this build. We're going to come up here and pick up the magic damage and life nodes. Going into the first node, we pick up the Unleash glyph. It grants 50% bonus to all magic nodes, these blue ones. These all get 50% increased when the glyph is in place. And then the bonus, if you have 40 intelligence in this little diamond area here, after spending 50 mana, you deal increased damage and gain mana generation. Super nice, more mana generation. You're going to need it. You want to put more frozen orbs out there to cause those explosions. super good. But remember, we need 40 intelligence, which means we need a minimum of 8 of the normal nodes with intelligence. And we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then there's 9 and 10 here if you want to reclaim these points, but it does give us skill damage as well. We're gonna grab both of these. Make sure you get the willpower bonus here for the extra resistance. It gives us some magic damage as well. All those are really good. Your primary board of damage is going to be over here, your Icefall. Icefall works great for this build, but we also get a lot of value out of Enchantment Master just because we get some extra little bits in here that are super, super nice for magic in general. And I like coming in from the left or from the bottom of Icefall because it's a lot more accessible to get what we need. So for this, I think we start with Enchantment Master because right when we come from the bottom of Enchantment Master, we come right up, we get these defense for potion healing. And we come over and we get the key passive, which is your enchantments are 20% stronger. Enchantments, again, is going to be the extra free frozen orb, and direct damage from skills applies up to 50% chill for Frostbolt. So scaling those is going to be nice. It gives you the extra free frozen orb. Then we're going to come over here and we're going to grab resistance, damage taken over time, reduction, a little more defense. And we're going to cut over into Icefall, which is our primary board. So this gives us damage to chilled enemies. Enemies that can be chilled will be chilled most of the time. Gives us magic damage as well. We can pick up damage reduction. So if the enemy is chilled, they deal less damage to us. Some nice survivability. We want to grab some willpower and int on the way down and then get killing a frozen enemy. We do that a lot. Grants you 15% of your maximum life as a barrier. Another synergy option here for barrier if you want to run a variant of this build that gives even more intensity to barriers. We cut over, we pick up cold damage, applies to all of us, plus a % chill application. Very, very strong. And we want the % cold damage here. So we want at least 460 intelligence in our Paragon in general to activate this 10% more cold damage because everything we do is cold damage. We cut down and we pick up the Frostbite Glyph. For every 5 willpower purchased in the range, you deal increased damage to chilled targets, and enemies deal reduced damage to you after they are no longer frozen. So if you freeze them and then they break out of the freeze, if they're somehow still alive, they'll do reduced damage to you, which helps a lot in some of the intense mobbing dungeons that you'll be doing later on. This also gives you damage to chilled enemies, more intelligence, damage reduction as well for survivability. We cut down into Frigid Fate, which is your second ice-focused board. We don't have a lot of points available after we finish the top left. So we're going to come down here, pick up as much intelligence and willpower as we can. We get cold resistance and lucky hit chance. Remember, we have some procs for lucky hit chance in this build. And then we're going to come down and pick up Frigid Fate. Dealing damage to vulnerable enemies increases your lucky hit chance by 1% up to 15%. So we have some procs in here for the build that are very lucky hit chance focused, which is super nice. There's some scalers in here, right? Lucky hit chance, frost skills have a chance to instantly freeze. Plenty of synergy there and ways to make the build even stronger. Once we've gone over here and gotten that, we now want to finish off with the top left of the Enchantment Master, which gives us magic damage, affects all of our abilities. We come up and we get more magic damage on top of some intelligence, as well as some resistance and defense. And in that glyph spot, we put the Enchanter. For every 5 intelligence purchased within range, you deal more magic damage. And each skill equipped in enchantment slots gains 13% resistance to that skill's element. Not super important, but we're picking up intelligence anyways, so that's kind of free there. And then I just slapped on Elemental Summoner here because at the very corner of Elemental Summoner, when you sneak on over in here, you can get 5, 15, 10, 15% more magic damage, which just works for the build. So this is my first pass on what a Paragon board would look like for Frigid Fracture, and that is the entire build. Let me know what you think about the build, if there's changes that you think should be made to the build and what you think about it, or if you're going to be using it, let me know in the comments below. See you next time. If you enjoyed yourself today, leave a like down below. You can support me and my work on Patreon and view Patreon exclusive content, link in the description. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next one.